We are now going to start our long program with the distinguished Senator Murray, the distinguished Mayor McGinn, and our distinguished member Mark Wright, who will moderate the discussion. We'll ask them to come forward and thank them very much. It's an honor to have them both at our podium. We appreciate their time in the midst of their heavy campaigning. So on we go. Thanks, Mark.
So as the candidates get set, I have to tell you that I overheard both of them request a prayer from Father Steve. What do you do with that, Father Steve? No, you know what? I think we're in for a real treat today because these two men are locked in a pretty intense fight for the office of mayor in the city of Seattle. They're giving all of themselves, and actually both of them have, to public service for all of their working lives. So I'm really excited for today, and I want to thank the candidates in advance for being here. President Laura, fellow Rotarians, distinguished guests. So we're going to learn more about the two men running for mayor of Seattle, but first a little background on the job itself. The mayor of Seattle makes $179,000 a year, if I'm not mistaken, Mayor McGinn. Oversees a budget of $4 billion and a city workforce of more than 10,000 people. So as most of you know, Seattle has a strong mayor form of government. That means the mayor is not only the political leader of the city, but also the chief executive officer overseeing contracts, personnel, and all that other stuff. Incumbent Mayor Mike McGinn was elected 4 years ago, his first elective office. McGinn is one of 6 children. He grew up on Long Island, New York. His mom was a school principal. His dad also worked for the school district. McGinn went to the University of Washington Law School, has worked as a lawyer, litigator, a neighborhood activist, Sierra Club state chair, and a nonprofit founder. He lives in Greenwood with his wife and 3 children. State Senator Ed Murray was born in Aberdeen, one of 7 children. He spent a lot of his childhood in Alki in West Seattle. Murray has represented Seattle's 43rd district since 1995. As many of you know, he was the prime sponsor of Washington's historic marriage equality law, which voters upheld in 2012. In the legislature, Murray has served a number of key roles relating to budget, transportation, and Senate leadership. He lives with his husband, Michael, on Capitol Hill here in Seattle. I'd like to have you all give a warm welcome to our two candidates today. And now comes the fun part. I didn't want to do a debate because I just don't like debates, because you ask a question and then the candidate doesn't answer it, and then the rebuttal rebuts something that wasn't asked, and then you get down a rat hole. So what?
You've been to see if you can pull this off.
I'm just being honest about this. So what I think is going to happen today, and is that we're going to have a really good discussion on the issues, and I'm not going to cut anybody off. We're going to flesh a lot of issues out so that you all can know where these two candidates stand on all kinds of issues and all kinds of leadership styles. A lot has been made about that. So first, I would like to have Senator Murray with a 2-minute introductory statement as to why you want to be mayor of Seattle.
Sure. As you heard, I grew up in West Seattle in a working class family, a rather large one, as you picked up. My family also is Irish Catholic, and we were inspired by John Kennedy. My parents were, and I watched that growing up. And part of that inspiration was the concept of public service. And Seattle is a special place because initially, when I came out, I thought I couldn't be involved in politics in an elective office. But I've had the chance to work 4 years in the city council for Martha Cho, and I've had the chance to serve 18 years in the Washington State Legislature. And we've done some pretty significant things in the Washington State Legislature, whether it's passing the largest transportation package in state history, passing some of the strictest car emission standards in the country, and even in this very, very, very difficult legislative session, funding the Affordable Care Act that will make a difference to 300,000 Washingtonians. The only way I've learned to govern is by reaching out to people who are different than me, because that's the only choice I have in Olympia. It's a very, I have to work across an aisle, and I have to work across a rather vast geography as well as ideology differences. And it is those skills that I would love to bring as mayor of Seattle to deal with issues such as public safety and police reform, how we grow, how we remain an equitable city, how we remain an affordable city, how we as a city government become one of the most innovative governments in the city of Seattle, in the nation. How we become the most innovative city and as far as transportation and the environment. We have a whole series of issues that face us. Hope you'll look at my record and consider me as you make your decision. Thank you for having us here this afternoon.
Thank you. This deep chair, a big lunch. I'm going to have to come up to the edge of my seat at some point. So no, I never ran for elective office before. I was very active, as you heard from my resume, in community affairs. I was president of my community council. I was chair of the chapter of the Sierra Club. I formed a nonprofit. I am one of 6 kids. My dad was a lifelong educator, as was my mom, and I think it was their commitment to public service meant a lot to me. I have 3 kids in public schools. My wife's been a treasurer in the PTAs, both at the middle school and high school and elementary schools all along. And I ran because I thought government was getting further away from people. And I thought that there were serious issues that we weren't urgent enough about or serious enough about. Education was one of them. It felt like the prior mayor held the school system at arm's length instead of fully engaging. I worry about climate change. We can really see the effects of it right in front of us, and we're the last generation that can do anything about it. So those were the things that propelled me to run for office. Of course, when I took office, there are the things you want to work on and the things you have to work on. And we were in a deep recession. And so we went out to the public and we spoke to them. I held over 150 town halls where I went out and brought my department heads with me and we listened. And jobs was a high priority. And we are now one of the fastest growing urban economies in the nation. But it wasn't just jobs, it was that people should have a greater opportunity to share in those jobs. So we've launched an innovative program where we connect our low-income workers to the areas of our economy where we see high growth in jobs, our pathways to careers. Things like paid sick leave, which are controversial, but try to lift up the income of low-income, the benefits of low-income workers. Education was identified as a priority, and we passed doubled the Families in Education levy. And we're working to expand transit, receive city council support for that, as well as building a statewide coalition to stop coal trains. And we're one of the first cities in the nation to begin work to divest from fossil fuels. So those are the types of issues that I've worked on and I care about, and I'm sure we'll get into the details of this.
Okay, thank you. Both candidates warned me that they are capable of speaking uninterrupted for a half an hour. And so
someone should time us.
Or
So
longer.
what I'm going to do is, if I jump in, don't take it personally. I think it's interesting that you both came from large families, and all the kids that I know, all the people that I know that came from large families are very interesting, because you have to learn how to navigate in the world, I think, in a much different way when you're part of a large family. Briefly, Senator Murray, what did growing up in that kind of environment teach you about getting heard, getting what you want, and the art of compromise?
Well, I'm the middle child, and so that might give you some indication of how I approach things. I often found myself learning to negotiate and bridge between my older siblings and my younger siblings and my parents. And I have said this before, my first political experience was growing up. It was my siblings who taught me politics, because when you're in a large family, and when you're kind of close together in age, my brother is only 11 and a half months younger than I am. That's called an Irish twin. You have to learn how to communicate and get along.
Okay, Mayor McGinn.
Were you in the same year of school?
No, luckily no.
That's the real Irish twins. So that's a great question, and thank you for asking. I'm 4th of 6. I have 3 older brothers. I have 2 younger sisters. And you do have to be a little bit sharper, a little bit wittier, a little bit stronger when you have 3 older brothers. I noticed something. Our mom and dad didn't like it when anybody teased each other at the table, but if you could make them laugh, you could get away with a little bit. So there was a lesson there as well. I played rugby in college, and I remember my mom coming out being very upset, watching me run around, getting hit. And I said, "Look, I got 3 older brothers. Nothing that happens out there is worse than what I got growing up." So I do think growing up in a large family, which was smart, competitive, engaging, and as I said, my parents were really engaged in public service. All of those things, I think, have had a lifetime effect on me.
Mayor McGinn, you mentioned that you ran the first time because you felt government was getting too far from the people. Define what that means. And after 4 years and 150 town halls, is government closer to the people of Seattle? If so, how?
I think we are closer, and I think we have more to go as well. We've really worked on being more inclusive in our outreach. It's, you know, every once in a while you hear this concept of a divide, like who's in or who's out. Even the very way I ran my transition, I didn't form a transition committee. We put out a questionnaire to people, and anybody could go out, fill it out, respond to it. We ended up with like 80 different ambassadors. We hire people from different ethnic communities to do the outreach to the communities themselves. You know, at the same time, of course, when Amazon wants to sit down and talk about locating here, we talk to them because that's lots of good jobs, and we landed them, and we're proud of that. So everyone has a seat at the table. It's just nobody owns the table. The reason I say we need to get more urgent is I mentioned one, climate change, right? We know we have to do something, but we're not doing it. You know, we're not moving with the urgency required that the scientists tell us are required, not the politicians, not the pundits, the scientists. I look at a deep achievement gap in our educational system. I look at the fact that, you know, we've seen income inequality rise for decades. I worked for a congressman in the Reagan era, and that's really where we made a switch, where we were growing a middle class to where we were dividing the nation against itself. And I think that the kind of the politics of accommodation and log rolling, yeah, we'll give you a transit line if you build a bunch of new polluting superhighways, mega projects. That's not actually a solution. I believe we're in an era of choices, and I was prepared to present hard choices to the public.
Okay, I'd like Senator Murray to respond to that. And also, I'm going to play devil's advocate. What would be so bad about having Mike McGinn continue for the next 4 years? I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Handle that one? Was that
So,
for me?
no, listen,
No.
this is, I mean, we have, employment is improving. There are construction cranes everywhere you look. Bertha is digging as we speak. Why shouldn't he get 4 more years?
So did you want me to respond to his question as well, or to this
Yes,
question?
you can do both, yeah.
What was the first one?
So the first one was getting government closer to the people.
Yes, you know, there's so much opportunity to get government closer to the people these days, given technology, given social media. I think we've only just begun to tap that. You know, I have town halls, and you'll get 50, 60, 100 people to show up for a legislative town hall, but we started to do telephone town halls too, where you get 4,000 or 5,000 people. Some of my colleagues will get up to 7,000 people who will stay on the phone for an hour, and you have a very, very different conversation in that setting than you do in the regular town hall. One of the great things about being a legislator is there is no way to be closer to the people, and if you know any of my colleagues, you know that they spend most of their days in coffee shops around the city, meeting with people in groups and one-on-one, because we don't have offices when we're out of session, and so that really brings it very, very close. I am, to get to your second question, I am running because I believe that this has been contentious and divisive administration. I believe having experience in government actually matters. I think understanding how government works actually matters. I think that the opportunity to work with the police, the U.S. Justice Department, we lost an opportunity. We had several years of fighting the Justice Department, fighting the U.S. Attorney's Office, having 36 organizations, including the ACLU, write a letter to the mayor asking that he work with the group. In the end, you know, the Justice Department and the mayor worked on a product that I believe is good, but I believe it put us years behind. It's making a promise that you won't fight the tunnel, and yet you fight the tunnel, and you call the governor dishonest, and we waste 2 years and we're behind on transportation. And the concern was about cost overruns. So far, there have been 16 projects that the state has completed, all of them on budget or under budget, on time or under time. That's not true of the part that the city has responsibility of, the seawall in particular, that is now over budget and significantly over the time it's supposed to be done. So okay. I want to bring a different voice to government.
Okay, so I'm going to cover police reform. I'm going to cover the tunnel in just a little bit. We've touched on something here that I think is at the center of this campaign, substance versus style. think a lot has been written that you both are fairly similar on the issues, but a lot of people would say that you differ on style. And Mayor McGinn, you said something during the King 5 debate last week. You said the issue isn't style, it's whether we're getting things done. Jump off from there, and are you too abrasive? Because this is Seattle, for Pete's sake. You have to be nice. Don't you know that? No, I'm kidding.
You're asking great questions, by the way, and I'm glad you're going to return to the DOJ and the tunnel, because there's a couple of things that were stated there that deserve a response.
We'll get there.
And thank you. I think I understand that Senator Murray sees us disagreeing in Seattle on things, but I think he confuses Seattle with Olympia when he says that things aren't getting done. We're actually getting a lot done here. The Families and Education Levy was a 9-0 vote from the City Council, and we doubled it. Tough times, built a very strong coalition for that. You mentioned our economic success. And it's not just that we're riding the recovery, we're actually growing faster than most other places. And now the challenges we face are how we deal with growth. And I'll expect we may touch on that issue as well. With respect to the Department of Justice investigation, and we'll get into this more later, it's important as a mayor to involve your civil rights leaders and your community in the dialogue about how reform occurs. And Senator Murray will concede it's a good outcome for something that languished for decades. So we're making progress in that respect as well. So we've balanced our budget. We finished every year in the black, and with the City Council, we're rebuilding the rainy day fund. It'll be to the highest levels ever. In fact, our emergency sub-fund, which we'd need in case of an earthquake, is also at the highest level ever. So I think if and I understand also the idea of experience in government matters. I'll tell you, experience in the mayor's office matters. I can walk down the street and I've got to be able to email Peter Hahn about where the potholes are when I meet someone on the street. I don't think there's anyone closer to the public than a mayor, and especially since I'm now very well known due to all the TV coverage of me as well. So I think if you look across any metric, even crime, and I know that crime is a serious concern in neighborhoods across the city, and it should be until, people need to feel safe. People want to feel safe in their communities. But we're, in fact, at a 30-year low citywide. And this is through the midst of a very tumultuous time for the police department. So I think that what we see is that there's not actually very many criticisms by Senator Murray of my policy positions. He basically says he'll do what I've done. He'll just somehow or another do it nicer. And I think that we have a strong mayor system. We also have a strong council system.
Okay, let me
and I think
jump
it's
in.
the job of elected officials to raise the issues, debate them, make decisions, and push ahead. And don't forget that Seattle nice sometimes is also Seattle process. And we're getting things done here.
So Senator Murray, you said that, not just about style, but you said that the mayor has been not as effective, a lack of effectiveness, and the government isn't functioning the way it should be. Can you give me a specific example of what you're talking about?
Sure. I gave you two already with the controversy on the viaduct and the controversy around police reform. I would go further that in many of the things that the mayor mentions that the council finally got to 9-0 on were very, very contentious debates. And time after time, it was a council that stepped in and straightened the situation out, whether it was a seawall, whether it was a memorandum of understanding related to a potential new stadium, whether it was the decision about who the special monitor should be. It's a council who had to step in after a very contentious disagreement. And there was always tension between legislative bodies and executive. That's natural. But we have gone through something in Seattle that we haven't seen in our lifetimes as far as a council and a mayor and the animosity between them. And one of the council members who endorsed me pointed out that she hadn't had a meeting with the mayor for 2 years. When I worked on council staff, I saw Norm Rice on the floor every week, walking in and out of folks' offices.
Okay, let me get into police reform and crime now. This to the mayor. How did we get to the point that the federal government had to intervene and do a course correction on our police department? How did it get that bad?
That's a great question. And by the way, every council member is offered a meeting with me whenever they please, and we always accept every request for a meeting immediately. So and we're happy to meet with them, and we meet with many of them often. The issue of the Department of Justice and how it happened it's something that's a situation in cities across the country, and it has to do with the culture of policing, not just in Seattle, but the culture of policing generally. And it was something that I felt and heard about on the campaign trail when I was out there, which was particularly in our communities of color. I remember being at Rainier Beach Community Center when I was campaigning, and a woman came up to me and said, "You're running for mayor. What are you going to do for me?" I said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And she said, "I got 2 teenage kids. They're good kids. They sag their pants, and I don't like it when the police harass them because of the way they look." And that was, that hit me hard, because I have a 14-year-old boy. He sags his pants, and I'd hate it if he was harassed because of the way he looked. And by the way, I can't make him stop sagging, and if you're a parent, don't try. It doesn't work well. And this is something that's been decades in the making, and I've heard my opponents say it's embarrassing we have a consent decree, and I've said this before, it's embarrassing that it took us decades to do something about it. So we did negotiate in good faith when the DOJ arrived. We cooperated fully in the investigation, and we have an agreement that my opponent acknowledges is good. Actually, when asked what he thought about it, when asked if there was anything he disagreed with on TV, he said probably not. I thought the probably was revealing, because it suggested to me that he hasn't even read it yet. It's a good agreement. We're implementing it, and we've brought people together on reform.
Senator Murray, your response?
Sure, I read it, and I've actually met with the U.S. Attorney's Office as well as the Justice Department. I think that kind of remark is indicative of the type of leadership that we've had over the last 4 years. I think that, one of the things that I've recognized over the years, I just finished reading a book last spring. It's a Jesuit book called Heroic Leadership, and one of the principles, it's based on the Ignatian spiritual exercises, but one of the things it points out is a heroic leader is somebody who recognizes other people as leaders and values other people and doesn't dismiss them as not having done their homework.
Violent crime went up, if I'm reading the numbers correctly, from 2011 to 12. Murder rate was up 13%, rape was up 19% in the city. Historically, the rates were much higher 7 years ago. I think the stabbing death of a Shoreline Community College professor, Troy Wolf, in downtown really shocked a lot of us. He was just walking home from the Sounders match, and he was stabbed to death by a mentally ill man. Raises a lot of issues. I mean, public safety, police staffing, how we treat the mentally ill. Senator Murray, if elected mayor, what would you do to address the palpable fear that some people have of walking in certain parts of this city at night?
Yes, well, during the primary debates, the mayor would say that crime is down, and several of us would point out, Charlie Statiker was one of them, Bruce Harrell was another, that crime is not down in all neighborhoods, and not all crimes are down. So I think the first thing you have to do is acknowledge that you actually have a problem. And the downtown area is one of the areas. It's not the only area. You can go up to Lake City and hear some of the same concerns. You can hear them on Capitol Hill. I think part of this is going to rest on getting through the police reform process, so we have a police force that is trained in the skills necessary to intercede. Part of it is always a very human aspect. There are people on the street who are in despair. The number of homelessness has increased statewide significantly. Let me just give you one small example. Before the Great Recession, there were 2,000 homeless children going to school and living with their family. Now it's 25,000 statewide, homeless children living with their families. So that gives you an indication of just how hard we've been hit. Some of the things that we did this year in the legislature will provide mental health treatment for the first time for people who are sleeping on our streets right now. One youth service provider pointed out to me that she will save $250,000 in her agency as people sign up for the mental health part of Obamacare, thus freeing up more money to put on other homeless people and to deal with the population that is in despair. So that you take that care of that part, you reform the police department, and then you need to be able to, the police department need to have a clear message. What I hear from them, they don't have a clear message, that they need to act and arrest people who are engaging in criminal behaviors, including open drug markets.
Mayor McGinn?
So of course I've taken crime seriously, and we did see a dramatic spike in the murder rate at the beginning of last year. We had 22 murders in the first 5 months of the year. And in fact, I went to every one of those murder sites with my chief of police and/or the head of the homicide division, and we reviewed the facts and circumstances of that. And we called together the community on how we could work together on it. The second 7 months of that year, there were 5 murders. And, sometimes it's what are averages and probabilities, and sometimes what is work. But they got busy. We partnered with the federal government on gun stings and stiffer enforcement for gun crimes. We partnered with the community on better gun education and reaching out to our youth. Since then, we've expanded the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. We've also launched a program because I invited in the black leaders, particularly from the churches, and they came in to me and said, Mayor, we have men returning to our community from jail, and we know which ones want to succeed, but they need help, and we would like you to partner with us. And we did. We launched something called Career Bridge, in which we have the churches and combining with the job training and human services to help bring people back. Because if we don't, within just a couple of years, the majority of those individuals are likely to be back in jail. So it's not just the moral thing to do for them, it's the safe thing to do for us. So we've taken it very, very seriously. And to suggest that I haven't taken it seriously, Senator Murray, is a distortion of the record. Mental health is particularly challenging. My friend Shannon Harps was killed by somebody on Capitol Hill returning to her house on New Year's Eve by somebody who'd been in and out of the mental health system. Despite that murder, despite that tragedy, despite the calls for change, we were 50th in the nation in mental health beds. And our chief has gone down and testified to that. And that's the politics of neglect. I suppose everybody agreed on that down in Olympia, that was okay. But it isn't okay, because we feel it here. So we're getting together with businesses and residents and the social service agencies to talk about how can we invest local money to provide more services to people who are in obvious mental distress on the street, but don't meet the standard for civil commitment. And we will work to address that locally and do our best to address that issue, because it is a fact of city life. And just one more thing, because I do not want to segmentize those with mental health illnesses. Vast majority of them have family, friends, healthcare, take care of it. But there's a small number who destabilize and are on our streets and need help.
So tell me, Mayor McGinn, why the Police Guild is supporting Senator Murray and not you?
Well, it's fascinating, because what I heard Rich O'Neill, what I didn't actually hear him say it, I saw him write it. And I worked really hard to listen to everybody on the reform issue. That was the advice we received from Connie Rice, the noted civil rights lawyer in L.A., who worked she sued for years in L.A., and then she was an advisor to the police department, met with thousands of police officers, and she says you can't impose it from the top down. You have to engage everybody. So in addition to meeting with civil rights leaders multiple times, many, many times, I also met with police officers in small groups and listened to them, because I wanted to hear from everybody, and we brought them together on the Community Police Commission. They did not want that consent decree. They wanted me to fight. They wanted me to litigate. I wanted to negotiate something that would work. They've dropped their lawsuit, unlike what has happened in other places. But what Rich O'Neill said was, when Senator Murray said that it's an embarrassment, we have a decree and we want to get out from it as fast as possible, Rich O'Neill said those are my talking points. So I don't know exactly why they endorse Senator Murray, but I sure hope it doesn't embolden them to fight reform.
Do you have a response?
Sure. A couple. First, the mayor mentioned that Olympia probably agreed on cutting mental health. Folks, you know your legislators, whether they're Democratic or Republican, and mental health is one of the few areas that is not particularly partisan. We saw a huge loss of revenue, $20 billion over the life of the recession. We tried to raise taxes, and the voters turned them back, and a lot of that was directed directly towards mental health. And again, the mayor fails to acknowledge that the fight in the Senate resulted in the passage of the Medicaid funding that is going to have a significant impact on mental health. So, I just think to sort of take the Tea Party talking points and say, well, you made those cuts, infers that we're wasting it somewhere else, except acknowledging the fact that statewide we've been through a really tough time. Now, on the police reform issue and on the consent decree, again, the Justice Department approached another city, Austin, and Austin dug down with their police and their city, and it ended. Seattle didn't. This mayor did choose to fight it. You can go back and read the newspapers. Up until the very end, when a decision was made about who the court-appointed monitor would be. And a consent decree, the next city over is New Orleans. We're a northern city on the West Coast. I believe we should have taken that opportunity from day one and worked with the Obama Justice Department to reform our police department.
Okay.
And the Justice Department has said that there was nothing that they ever said that would have prevented from the mayor from putting together a citizen commission from day one.
Okay, we have to move on. I want to talk about the panhandling ordinance. City Council passed it, the mayor vetoed it. This was a really divisive issue. I could really see the both sides of this. Tell us why, very briefly, and we're kind of running out of time in terms of hitting all the topics that we need to. Why did you veto it? And if you're elected, would you have, if you were mayor at the time, would you have signed it? Mr. Mayor first.
Yeah, and you know, this is an interesting issue because I went through the entire 2009 campaign with this issue percolating and didn't take a position because it was out of deference to Tim Burgess and the city council process. I wanted to give them the opportunity, I wanted to give Councilmember Burgess the opportunity to make his case, you know, in the council. It ultimately came up to a 5-4 vote, so it was put to me as to whether or not I supported it, and I would have been the deciding vote. And about a couple of weeks out, the Human Rights Commission put together a report on that was very persuasive to me, that what we were doing was we were criminalizing an activity that we shouldn't. We had laws against aggressive behavior, which we can enforce. And that was very divisive. I want to say we still have very serious issues with people with homelessness, people with mental health issues, and people who break the rules on our city streets. And I'm not talking, there are crimes which need swift enforcement, and there are low-level violations which need attention. And we have brought together businesses, residents, social service agencies, city agencies through our Center City Roundtable, and we are expanding services and working to expand responsible prosecution of those who don't follow rules about urinating in public, drinking in public, and behavior. And we actually have a consensus rather than a divisive approach that we had at the beginning of our
Okay,
term.
Senator Murray?
Yes, I would not have signed it. I would have vetoed it, and I would have tried to prevent the council from even passing it. I think that, you know, again, it goes back to the issue of getting our police the training they need in an urban atmosphere, in a very diverse atmosphere, giving them the skills that they need so that we can actually enforce the laws that are enforced and that people will trust them so we don't break down into one of these very typical Seattle fights of I'm for civil liberties and I'm for law enforcement, and I think that it doesn't have to be an either-or situation.
Okay, let's move on to the tunnel. Mr. Mayor, why was it so important for you to force the tunnel project to a public vote? And what will happen if you're reelected and there are cost overruns? And I know this is a big question, but if you can keep it fairly brief.
No, I'll keep it really tight. So the state, when it passed the tunnel project, when it passed that transportation bill, in order to find the financing, remember, we were in the depths of recession, and the advocates there, you know, the chamber, et cetera, wanted the most expensive option. And so the state agreed to it when there was a provision placed on it that said that the city of Seattle would have to pay all cost overruns. And in fact, Mr. Murray voted for that provision, and it was on a bill that bore his name. Immediately thereafter, everybody claimed, well, it doesn't, you know, some claimed it didn't really apply. There are many in the legislature, including legislative leaders, who claim it does apply. Let's just put the cost of the tunnel alone at $2 billion. The overall project's much higher. Let's just say the cost of the tunnel alone is $2 billion. Let's say there's a 10% cost overrun on that. That's $200 million. That's a lot of money to come up with for a city. Let's say it's 20%. Those aren't, you know, those aren't within the range of possibility. That's $400 million. And at the time, I was trying to figure out, how do we keep community centers open? How do we maintain human services? Which we did through the recession. So we had the debate. The governor came forward and said the state will pay. She's not here now to help us with that, but she did say that. Inslee said the state will pay. But we even see just recently when we went down to the state, when WashDOT went to the state to get more money to make up for tolling funding shortfalls, the legislature said no. If you're not going to raise enough money from tolling, Seattle's going to have to figure out how to come up with it. So I think it's an open issue. I don't know how it's going to play out.
Senator Murray?
And I intend to stay there. And I'll say one more thing about this. I don't know how Senator Murray goes to the legislature and tells them to pay for cost overruns when he voted for, and it was his bill that said Seattle should pay.
Senator, your response?
Sure. You know, in the world of legislation, and I'm sorry that there seems to be a misunderstanding here, there was language added to the bill, and I did have the option of killing the whole bill because it was my bill. Or I had the option of passing the bill and continuing to work on the issue of cost overruns. I felt it was important for this city and for this state, for our transportation system, that we not let the viaduct fall down. And so I made a choice that I was going to have to, not make the good the enemy of the perfect. Now, having said that, the projects that the state have delivered so far are on time or quicker than on time, on budget or under budget. That is not true of how the city has managed its projects that are either over time or over budget. And the mayor, he made a promise not to fight this, and he fought it, and it wasn't just over cost overruns. He fought it in a campaign. He helped raise money for that campaign. I just think it's disingenuous to say it was about that. So ultimately, you have to ask yourself, who can go to Olympia to solve the problem? Somebody who has sat here through this forum and every other forum and bashed Olympia again and again, and then think you can turn around and make friends with Olympia. We need a mayor who actually builds relationships with Olympia. And we need a mayor who builds relationships with the city council. I think that's why 6 of them or 5 of them, a majority, have endorsed me. We need a mayor who will build bridges with our region. And that is going to be the difference on the cost overrun issue.
Okay, I want to get on briefly to 2 more topics. We have a huge backlog of repairs that need to be done to city streets. I think it's something like $1.8 billion. Where's that money going to come from? And also for parks, about $250 million in backlog of maintenance in parks. Very quickly, Mayor McGinn, where do we get the money for those 2 big needs?
So parks, we have a parks levy renewal, which is coming up, and I helped pass the last parks levy renewal. As an advocate, I put together the citizen campaign to work with the city council, get it on the ballot over the mayor's objection at the time. So we have a new levy coming up, and we're going to look at whether it might be a Metropolitan Parks District, it might be a levy renewal. I've also floated the possibility of a soda tax, which passed with 70% in the city of Seattle. The statewide measure passed with 70% here. So those are all options I think we can look at for funding the parks, and we've put extra money into that when we get the chance. Next thing coming around for roads is the Bridging the Gap renewal. That's one piece of the puzzle, and we're going to have to look at how we fund our maintenance backlog. By the way, you may have heard reports that the maintenance backlog has grown. Actually, we measured it for the first time. The last Bridging the Gap actually called for an accurate measurement, and guess what? It's bigger than we thought it was by a lot. So we have increased maintenance spending through our general fund 37% over the last 2 years. Every time we get spare dollars, we put it into maintenance as well as walkways and safe routes to school. But I also worked to put together a coalition of 47 mayors across the state to go to the legislature to get a local funding option to rescue transit and to support Metro. Unfortunately, it passed the Senate, passed the House, failed in the Senate, and we're still waiting on Olympia here. And that is made more challenging, of course, because the state Senate has been taken over by the Republicans.
Okay, and that's something that he's blamed you for. He claims that you've lost the majority to Rodney
I am
Tom.
responsible for the mental health problem in Seattle, as is the legislature. I'm responsible for the road problem in Seattle, as is the legislature. If I'm elected mayor of Seattle and we face the backlogs and challenges we have, I will take responsibility, and I will seek to work with the legislature and not just bash the legislature. The question was about a backlog, $250 million backlog in major maintenance in our parks over the last 4 years. The mayor recommended 2 days after he submitted his budget a $29 million soda tax that actually was not in the budget he had proposed 2 days before. The backlog is $250 million. I have recommended and support a Metropolitan Parks District, which would be an ongoing tax stream. It's a piece of the property tax that would raise enough money to deal with the backlog and to keep our parks and our activities in those parks up to date and ongoing. $20 million doesn't solve a $250 million problem. And again, as far as local streets, We are doing less and less every year, and I wish I brought the sheet that showed the sidewalks, the fewer and fewer sidewalks that we're repairing every year. The one thing I know is I've known how to put together a transportation package that Seattleites liked and voted for by a huge margin. The mayor put together a transportation package and the voters rejected it, which is really hard to do in Seattle, to get the voters to reject taxes. But it is truly a real issue about being able to bring the right people together, set aside some of your own personal beliefs so that you can move transportation forward on the local level with the resources that exist.
Okay, lightning round. We don't have flashcards. So these answers I'd like to be very brief, just a couple of words. Who's your political hero?
Martin Luther King.
Senator Murray?
John Kennedy, Charles Stewart Parnell.
Proudest moment in politics?
It may have been the proudest moment in politics was when we spent $50,000 on a campaign and stopped a $5 million campaign that would have built more climate-changing highways in order to get transit, the politics of hostage-taking of transit that the legislature engages in.
Wow, that was a good one. Proudest moment in politics?
Which he supported.
Again, Olympia's a problem. Proudest moment, actually, I was asked this question, and I thought I was going to start by saying, Bill, I've been somewhat associated with the press, but my proudest moment is when we were a 49-49 tie, and I got Republicans to vote for the first time in state history for state dollars for farm worker housing. That meant that they had to admit that farm workers were here year-round, something they didn't want to do.
Nicest thing someone has said to you on the campaign trail?
It's really nice. I was walking down the street here, and it's just, hang in there, Mayor. You're doing a great job. I hear that a lot.
Nicest thing someone said to you?
You've lost weight.
When you work in television, they come up to you and they say, wow, you look a lot thinner in person. You're like, I don't know how to take that. The meanest thing someone has said to you on the campaign trail?
I don't know.
Okay,
I actually
that's
don't
okay.
know. I try to, accept it all with grace and equanimity.
There we go. Father Steve would agree with that. Senator Murray?
That I'm a racist.
Wow. Okay, so I know we're just about out of time, Laura. I just wanted to give you guys about 30 seconds each. I've talked with my kids, and I have a 17-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I tell them that it's on every generation to examine itself and to look at society and ask, what's happening in our society that's wrong, and what are we going to do to fix it? And I think we've done that pretty well as a society. I think we still have some problems. 30 seconds from each of you. As you look at the city of Seattle, what are the injustices? What's the injustice that needs to be fixed? And I'll start with you, Senator Murray.
The family I grew up in couldn't afford to live in the house that if we had to live in Seattle today. The fact that Seattle has become a less affordable city over the last few years is the biggest injustice that we have to address in the next 4 years.
Okay, Mayor McGinn.
Is this our close, by the way?
This is the close, yeah.
Okay.
So make
I
it
could
good.
feel it. I'll make it good, and I'll make it 30 seconds,
Okay.
too. 3 things. How do we live together as a multicultural society? We're becoming more diverse as a nation, and that means we have to be intentional. Racism still exists. It still matters. We have to work together as a community. How do we reduce income inequality? It's driving us apart. We have to bring up the wages and benefits and buying power of our low-wage workers, and whether that's through a minimum wage or paid sick leave or better job training programs or better education. Finally, I'll say it again, we're the last generation that can do anything about climate change, and we're seeing it happen right in front of us. I don't want to wake up 20 years from now and say to my kids, we didn't do enough, but guess what? The politicians got along. I'd rather we do something about it.
All right, I want to thank both of you for being here. And also, just thank you for your public service as well. Good luck to both.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.